Welcome to Melt. I'm Suresh Venkat. Last month, research from Kantar India released the 10th edition of its annual brand footprint report. Now, this report uses factors like revenue, relatability, and profitability to list the country's most chosen FMCG brands. A list that's topped by Parle, Amul, Britannia, Clinic Plus, and Tata Consumer Products. To know more, we are in conversation today with K Ramakrishnan, the Managing Director, South Asia Worldpanel Division at Kantar. What can brands learn from this report and how does it help understand the Indian consumer? Let's find out as we get ready to melt with Kantar's Ramki. So Ramki, let's start with some very basic definitions here. What exactly are brand footprints and how do you measure them?
So to talk about that, I need to tell you what we do in Worldpanel. In Worldpanel, we have a panel of about 85,000 households that represent India in any which way you want to cut it. And we track what people purchase every month. And we build a database out of that. And all our intelligence is derived out of that. So brand footprint is a method of ranking of brands. There are several ways in which you can rank brands. Some people rank based on the trust that brands have. Some people rank it based on the brand equity that exists. In fact, Brand Z of Kantar is also one of those, which will come shortly. So there are several ways. The way in which we do it is by a metric called consumer reach points. Now, what we mean by consumer reach points is it's a product of three things: the population of the country, the penetration of a particular brand, and the number of times a consumer interacts with it. When I say interact, purchases or picks it up, right? So the product of three things. So a product of these things is consumer reach points, and the basis of that we rank all the brands, and that's how the brand footprint report is born.
And you've measured, what, 400 plus brands across 5 categories in your study. And how exactly were these brands chosen?
We are agnostic to the brand. So we choose all the brands that are available that are being purchased by our panelists, right? So to that extent, there's no choosing of brands. So we then just rank them based on the data that we get, which is in terms of what is their penetration, how many times they are being picked up, that's all. And on that basis, we rank everything that is available.
Okay. Let's come to the third definition. Your report talks about something called the moment of truth.
Yeah.
What exactly is this moment of truth?
So in our definition, the moment of truth is the final situation or moment in which you're picking up a product. There are several moments before that. You can interact with a brand by looking at an ad or looking at the way it is displayed. You may form impressions around it. But in our definition of moment of truth, we're talking about the moment at which you're actually picking up. So that's what is a choice. The choice to purchase a brand. That is what we are referring to as the moment of truth.
And so obviously marketers are very interested in this moment of choice with brands competing for, I would imagine, scarce shelf space across these reach points. What do marketers need to know about this moment? My hand is going across a set of soaps. I'm going to touch this one, pick up this one, sniff this one, put this one in my cart and abandon it near the checkout counter perhaps.
That is true.
So what do marketers need to know in terms of consumer behavior?
So marketers definitely need to know how each of these factors work. We say penetration, we say frequency, we say population. They can do nothing about population. But penetration, certainly. How do we make a larger percentage of the population choose your brand in a given period of time? There are many factors that can affect that. The classic 4Ps formula, all of those work towards that. So one is that. Second is the fact that how can you improve the frequency or the number of times the consumer is interacting with your brand? So which can be by means of a pack play, it can be by means of extensive distribution, it could be by means of a promotion. Any of these could make the frequency of pickup of your brand higher. So on the one hand, penetration, which means making a larger number of people choose you. On the other hand, making them choose it more often. So those are the levers that marketers have in order to improve their consumer reach points.
Ramki, all the words you're using, penetration, touch point, reach, all of these seem a little old economy in the old world.
Okay.
With the advent of e-commerce, theoretically, if I could be sitting in a small town in India, my reach and penetration because of the nature of e-commerce is every city in India or every internet user in India. How do you define consumer reach points now?
Okay, so very simple. So we are not dependent on the channel of purchase, right? We are not saying at the moment when you're picking it up, when you're choosing to buy a brand is all we are saying. Whether you buy it in a modern trade store, whether you buy it in a kirana, whether you buy it over the telephone or whether you buy it online, any which way, there is a moment in which you decide that this is the brand that I'm buying, right? That's all is the moment of truth. So it is agnostic of the channel, it's agnostic of where you buy from or how you buy. So it's devoid of all that. So we are simply saying if there is a brand that finds its way into a consumer's household, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter which channel it comes from.
In the e-commerce world, what qualifies as penetration? Because in the physical world, if a product is in a store, I can say you've penetrated that region.
Yeah.
How do you calculate this?
So again, penetration is purely a consumer term. in which we are saying that what percentage of population has purchased a given brand or a category in a given period of time. That's all. Where they have purchased from doesn't matter. Whether they have purchased in e-commerce, it doesn't matter. Whether they have purchased in a Kirana store, it doesn't matter. They purchased in a Pan BD outlet, it doesn't matter. But it's been purchased. That's all. So in 1 year, if there are 60 out of 100 people have purchased a brand, then the penetration of the brand is 60%. Doesn't talk about where it is purchased from.
Your latest report says India now has, if I'm correct, 98 billion consumer reach points, and this is up from 89 billion in 2021.
Yeah.
98 billion seems like a large number.
Yes.
But put this number in context. What would other countries have, for instance?
That's a difficult number to answer for me offhand, but this number would easily be in the top 3 in the world.
Okay.
Yeah. So why I say that is some of the biggest brands globally, their improvement in consumer reach points or their growth in rankings have come on the top of India. So therefore, India contributes a whole lot in terms of, like I said, 3 factors, right? Population, penetration, frequency. We have a large bucket in population.
Yeah,
so any percentage...
Hard to beat us on that one.
Absolutely. So any shift in penetration points, that multiplier takes us to a very significant level as far as those numbers are concerned.
And is 98 billion sort of saturated number for India, or is there tremendous headroom even beyond that?
There is tremendous headroom because there are so many categories where the penetration is sub 50%. And even in the, say, apart from a toilet soap or a detergent which will have 100% penetration, there are so many categories which are below 80%. There are many below 30%. So there's lots and lots of headroom to grow in that.
And this growth in consumer retail touchpoints, what does this mean? That brick and retail mortar is fine and dandy in India, or that we're a nation of shopkeepers? What does this mean for marketers?
So, like I said, we are agnostic of channel or where it is purchased from. Having said that, from our data, we also pick up where it is bought from as a means of information.
Yeah.
So, we are still a very large traditional trade country, which is a grocer country, a Kirana store country. Modern trade is big, but not big enough. It is, let's say, close to 10%. E-commerce is in low single digits at the moment, but growing rapidly. All said and done, we are still a large traditional trade grocer country.
And it's been 20, 30 years of modern trade, and we're still at only 10% of the market in modern trade.
That is true. That is true.
So what do marketers need to know about Kirana stores then?
What they need to know about Kirana stores is 2 or 3 things. One is the fact that your availability in every Kirana stores, it is not defined by where you are or where your distribution is strong. It is defined by where the consumer is. So if the city is expanding beyond a certain point, and if there are Kirana stores open there, we have to make sure that it is available there and visible there and relevant there. So all these 3 factors have to be taken into account to make sure that you're able to attract consumers and also be available at the moment of when the consumer wants to make the choice of picking up a brand.
Ramki, most marketers live in posh parts of urban India, like what I call Bandra India or Indranagar India or Vasant Vihar India.
Okay.
Nice places to stay. Marketers need nice places to stay.
Yeah.
And yet they have to have strong opinions and strong understanding and sort of visceral understanding of what's happening in a village 100 kilometers from Jhumri Talaya.
Yeah.
How are marketers supposed to pull this off? How do they do it?
That's a very valid and interesting question. There are 2-3 ways in which marketers do it. I mean, some of the best known marketers that I have spoken to have a very strong understanding of the rural part of India very well. And they do it by 2-3 means. One is definitely they look at a lot of data sources, some of which being ours, where they look at the data to see what is happening in rural India. The second thing that they do is they have a lot of trade understanding. They spend a lot of time in their trade channels to understand what is happening in rural. The third understanding is physically immersing themselves, making sure that they visit at least some of these places once or twice a year to get a hang of what is happening. Is their understanding in line with what they see in reality? So it's a combination of data that is readily available or bought, combination of interactions with trade channels and individual physical immersions into that market. I think without this, it's not happening.
And should large FMCG companies, for instance, be hiring more people from rural India to work in their teams and to work in their companies? Would that help improve their understanding?
It might help to some extent in terms of a representation perspective, but one doesn't have to recruit from rural India to understand rural India. There are other means of understanding. We come into play in such places, and that apart, just by mere immersion, one is able to understand. So I won't completely agree that it has to be recruitment from rural India, although that is most welcome.
If you were a marketer today, how would you separate signal from noise vis-a-vis data from rural India?
So one is that before we start reading up on articles, before we start consuming a lot of media noise about what is happening, I would certainly look at data in the first place, which is hardcore numbers. The numbers seldom lie. So look at numbers the way you like, but get the truth out of it the way it really is. So that is the first thing that I would certainly do. Then, if there is something that is contradicting that they are hearing out in the noise, they have to listen to that as well to see, is there truth in that? And if there is not, they should be able to prove that that is not true. So if these two they're able to do, first, fundamentally understanding the numbers from ground reality. Secondly, verifying that to see if that is really reflecting what they think is happening in the market.
The top 5 brands, according to your study, are Parle, Amul, Britannia, Clinic Plus, and Tata Consumer. No surprises there, but were there any surprises in the next 20 brands?
Yeah, certainly there were. The growths in brands like Anmol and Haldiram definitely surprising. Definitely, it is encouraging to see brands like Anmol and Haldiram grow in such a way. Growth of Dabur is definitely something that is noteworthy. So there are lots of such brands which have had a step jump in terms of their rankings on account of their actions in the last 1 year.
Tell us about brands like Nisha Hair Color, Balaji Wafers, or Milma. These are brands, frankly, I haven't heard much about.
Yeah.
And yet they're in the top 25 in your brand survey.
Yeah. So if I were to talk about Milma, you'll find a lot of dairy brands in the brand footprint list. That's fundamentally because I told you the product of population, penetration, and frequency. And milk has a frequency of every day, right? So compare that to, let's say, a milk food drink like a Horlicks. You would buy a Horlicks once in 2 months. You would buy a milk every day. So the multiplier straight away is 1:60. So therefore, you will find a lot of milk brands here. As far as Balaji is concerned, certainly it's a brand that if you have not watched Balaji for so long, then you've missed out something for sure. If a marketer hasn't seen Balaji, it's a brand that has really, really grown. It is not a brand that is that you may have seen too much of communication about, but it's a brand that is present. It is a brand that is immensely grown in the snacking category. So those are things that I would like to say about these brands.
And Nisha Hair Color as well. I saw that as one.
Absolutely the same.
That's not a brand we hear about much, at least in urban circles.
That is true. That is true. So urban, yes, but top cities, no. Yeah, so it is definitely present in the next rung of cities, etc. So it's important to be aware of these brands and that they are growing in such a significant way.
Your report also says that after the lockdown, as it ended, the big brands saw the maximum growth. So does this signal a K-shaped recovery, that the big ones, the slightly moneyed ones, are going to go much faster, and the ones who are not as moneyed are going to grow much slower?
So we believe in this theory that penetration is almost everything. So a brand that is high in penetration stands to gain in any which way. Big brands tend to have high penetration and they tend to work towards that. So that high penetration growth automatically drives rating points, and that's why that growth is what you're seeing.
Okay, that's an interesting lesson for many people who are attempting to do D2C marketing, for instance.
Yes.
Right? And they're competing with the big brands. What do D2C marketers need to know about penetration?
Yeah, so like I said, penetration is agnostic of how you do it. Whether you do D2C, whether you do through dealers and network, it doesn't matter as long as you're able to reach enough number of consumers. There are several D2C brands which have been immensely successful, like some of the examples being Mamaearth and Sugar and so on. But there is a point of time when they realize that to rapidly expand their growth even more, there is a need for them to go beyond that digital space, and which is why you see Mamaearth today being available
in many stores. Yeah.
So what is that cutting point? I don't actually know whether it's 100 crores, 200 crores, 250 crores, but there is a point at which if they need to be driven, and if you notice, most of the D2C brands are driven by private equity who are hungry for growth. So that growth, there seems to be a certain point when there is a need for you to go beyond just being online. So that's what we've learned about this.
So e-commerce has got this curious world. They said, first we will sell it to you online because we don't need warehouse space and we don't need retail space. That's how we're going to sell it to you cheaper.
Yes.
And now all the e-commerce guys, Byju's for instance, is opening physical tuition centers.
Correct.
So what's happening in this world of e-commerce? First we said low cost because of no middleman, no warehousing. It will come directly from us to you.
Correct.
But now they seem to have all the costs of traditional marketers.
Correct.
Right? Plus the additional costs of running a digital enterprise. How do they compete with the big FMCG players, for instance?
In my mind, the cost advantage is a little bit of a myth. So to that extent, that middleman cost is not there. But there is a cost of being discovered, right?
There is.
Because the online world is filled with a plethora of billions of brands.
Yeah.
So for your brand to be seen, noticed, picked up, etc., there's a lot of effort. So the cost advantage to me is at the moment a myth. So therefore, there is a huge cost associated with that also. So therefore, that cost is required for you to be seen enough number of times and multiplied over time, right? So beyond that, when you demonstrate that kind of growth, there are many VCs and PE funds who are willing to ride on that growth and allow you to multiply that growth. And for that growth, the immediate available opportunity is the physical world or the offline world, which is why you see whatever you said, which is in terms of getting into physical stores or physical outlets being opened for even brands like Byju.
Ramki, another trend we have seen, according to a report, that snacking has grown tremendously during the lockdown for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
People are sitting at home and eating a lot of snacks
Yeah.
and drinking a lot of soft drinks. We don't see any health foods in your top 25 list. It seems to be all unhealthy food, and yet you see the newspapers or you talk to people in the market, they're saying health food is the next big trend.
Yeah.
So which one is true? Are we a nation of unhealthy eaters or are we trending towards any sort of healthy eating?
Yeah, so this is a debate that's been going on for quite some time, Suresh. One is the if it's a toss up between taste and health. In India, taste clearly wins. So which is why even when people try to market health foods, they add taste codes to health foods and not the other way about, right? So therefore, the taste is an extremely important part as far as India is concerned. Second factor, during the pandemic, a whole lot of snacking happened because people didn't go out. They were sitting at home. What they would have otherwise snacked outside got consumed in home. And when that became a habit and snacks started finding their way into the monthly basket, that just continued from there on. They just compensated it by various means. They added immunity boosters. They added some kind of medication, so-called immunity boosters, and several other additives and supplements. But the base eating of snacks continued, and it's still growing. It's continuing to grow at a very significant rate, whether it's biscuits or salty snacks or any of those, including carbonated beverages.
Let's now talk about inflation, or more precisely, shrinkflation.
Right.
Are big companies reducing size packs as we expect them to in this era of zooming inflation?
Definitely that has happened. I mean, see, there are some price points, which we call as the magic price points, right? The 5 rupee and the 10 rupee. There are the 5 rupee packs and there are the 10 rupee packs, and they get identified by them, right? Seldom do you find a shopper going and asking for, give me a 23.5 grams pack. It's a 5 rupee pack or it's a 10 rupee pack. And those points are not just about the money, it's also convenience. It is just that people
are buying, and all that, yeah.
People do not buy a 5 rupee pack because they have only 5 rupees. They buy 5 rupee packs or 6 5 rupee packs. So it's a multiplier, and that's something which is sitting in the mind that it's the right value to buy. So therefore, when marketers need to hold on to 5 rupees and 10 rupees and input costs are going steeply, they have no choice but to shrink the volumes a little bit. Definitely shrinkflation has happened. But in the recent phenomenon, in the recent last 6 months, I would say, whatever has happened in the form of shrinkflation has not been palpable enough for consumers to shrink their consumption. So in the sense that they continue to buy these, probably they've increased the frequency of purchase, and at each occasion they are buying lesser, but overall they're holding on to the volume. So if you look at the volumes of 5 rupees or 10 rupees packs, they have not gone down at all. They've held on to where they are.
And does your study say that consumers notice this shrinking of packets, and do they get upset about it?
At the moment, it has not been palpable. Yeah.
What exactly is rural India, Ramki? It's a hard question that we've all tried to answer. Is it a village that we see when we drive from Bombay to Pune? Is it a deep hinterland? Is it a small town? Is it a small village aspiring to be a small town? What exactly is rural India?
Yeah, unfortunately, the technical definition of rural India is what is not urban India, which means if it does not have a post office, if it does not have more than 60% of its income coming from agriculture, it's called urban India. And what is not urban is defined as rural. So that's the technical definition. But we should look at it more from the point of view of the infrastructure for sales, marketing, distribution that exists, etc. Like, for example, urban India is all the towns. Anything that you would call a town is urban India. So anything that you would go beyond towns into, let's say, a population set of less than 5,000 should technically be classified as a rural mindset, and that is what is rural India. So in fact, even in the smaller towns, you will find reflections of rural India in terms of mindsets, behavior, purchase patterns, etc. So there is no clear definition like this, even though we classify on the basis of the statistical distribution in India.
Let's talk a bit more about this K-shaped recovery, because that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That some brands are growing faster, which also means some consumers are going to recover faster and other consumers are going to recover a little slower.
Yeah.
What does this mean for marketers? That certain consumers will go back to previous spending patterns, certain consumers will struggle to get back there.
Yeah.
How do they read these signals?
So actually, there is a huge bipolarity in behavior in India, which is difficult to fathom for a whole lot of people. One is one set of consumers who are agnostic to inflation. To them, I haven't gone on a holiday in 2 years, I haven't eaten out much in 2 years, so I have that money, I can spend more. So they're not completely agnostic to inflation. And there's another set of people who've had loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, loss of jobs, whatever. And so therefore, they are in a situation where they're saying, I need to control how much I spend. And on top of that comes the inflation. So therefore, they are trying to tighten things a lot more. So that's one level of bipolarity. The second level of bipolarity that you see is in terms of categories of spending itself. The same consumer, on the one hand, spends a lot on movies. On the one hand, spends a lot on certain things that they have not spent for some time. Grooming, for example, took a huge beating during the time of pandemic, and it's come back at the moment. So people are spending on that. But at the same time, when it comes to essentials, there's a lot of actions that they are taking to manage this whole inflation scenario. Even though inflation is not new to India, there are some 5 or 6 actions which people normally take. One, if there is a possibility of adding unbranded products to the mix, they do that. If there's a possibility of moving to a smaller pack size, they do that. Third, If there is a possibility of buying something on promotion, they definitely do that. Likewise, there are a bunch of actions which people take, which they are continuing to do at this stage. In fact, one would expect that the premium end of the market would have shrunk during the inflation, but that's not the case, because the premium end is growing at its own.
Growing. Luxury cars are selling like hotcakes and people are cutting back on essentials. This is curious behavior.
Absolutely. Even within FMCG, the premium end of the market is growing faster than the mass end. That's why I said within categories also there's bipolarity. So it's a complex money manager that we have in the household. So to understand that that money manager that sits in the household is a huge task, and which is where data helps.
So if you were to go back to B school today and to teach marketing, are there any new subjects you'd introduce for marketers to understand these kind of signals?
I would definitely talk about metrics. Because the number of metrics that are getting taught is still limited. We are still limiting ourselves to return on capital employed, market share,
promoter score,
things like that. There is so much more right now. Like, for example, penetration as a metric itself is not penetrated enough, for people to understand that how important that is and why it is important for us to add more consumers than to keep the same consumers buying more. There was a theory at one point of time that it's cheaper to
total
retain
lifetime
consumers.
value and all that. Yeah.
I mean, today there is a consumer who's always flirting with multiple brands. So unique brand loyalty is a myth. So therefore, there is going to be multiple brands. If that is going to be the case, it's always important for you to keep adding consumers, because you are going to lose consumers. So it's a leaky bucket. As you lose consumers, you have to keep adding and ensure that that balance is maintained. So from that point of view, metrics matter a lot more. And I would definitely go back and focus a lot more on what are the metrics that people should watch for.
All right. Ramki, thank you very much for talking to us at Melt. It's been a pleasure and a great learning experience as well.
Thank you so much, Suresh. It's my pleasure and honor to be with you. Yeah.
That's a wrap on this episode. You can follow Melt on social media. The handle is Ready to Melt, or simply log on to readytomelt.com. If you'd like to follow me, it's @Suvenk on Twitter. Till next week, goodbye and thanks for watching.